So the purpose of this event is to basically inform law enforcement officers and prosecutors on what the intricacies and nuances of the new hands-free law is, so that everybody can understand how to apply it, how to enforce it, and to answer any questions that they would have. We're going to talk about what the actual prohibition of the law is, what's permitted, what the exceptions are, how the enforcement's going to work, and then what the penalties are. So this is the violation. No person shall operate any wireless telecommunication device while operating a motor vehicle upon any public road or highway unless the motor vehicle is lawfully stationary. Simple. Okay, now let's talk about what a motor vehicle is. So normally when we talk about like a DWI law, for example, we know what a motor vehicle is, anything that's motorized. However, there's a lot of exceptions. So it doesn't include an autonomous vehicle. Does anybody know what an autonomous vehicle is? Does a Tesla qualify as an autonomous vehicle, do you think? If you look at the actual statute, 3259, where it talks about autonomous vehicle, we're talking about self-driving vehicles that are fully or high automated. So while a Tesla may have part of the autonomous vehicle definition, it doesn't meet the full definition. The statute requires that the vehicle be able to fully do the dynamic driving, which means that the vehicle has to be able to make decisions on when to stop, come to full stop, how to park. And so what I would tell you is that as far as Teslas, that's not excluded from the statute. And then we have all-terrain vehicles, golf carts, vehicles propelled by horses. So we're talking about in the French Quarter, you have the horse-drawn carriages. That's not included in the statute. Pedicabs. So if it's being operated, by a human on a bicycle, those pedicabs, they're not included. And then motorized wheelchairs that are being operated by as the statute says, a handicapped person. So those are all excluded from the statute, and they're not considered motor vehicles. The other part of the statute, that when you look at this definition, it says unless the motor vehicle is lawfully stationary. So I want to talk about what that means. What is lawfully stationary? So if the motor vehicle is stopped, is in park, is in neutral, or is in gear, that is considered what? Stationary, do you think? So if the vehicle is stopped, but this is where I think it's important to understand what lawfully stationary. Let's say that the vehicle is stopped at a red light. Because the light is red, that's lawfully stationary. If the vehicle is stopped at a green light, is that lawfully stationary? No. So if the vehicle is stopped, is in park, or is in neutral, and is in gear, but not moving because it's lawfully stopped, then the law doesn't apply. So technically, if you're at a red light, you can use your phone. That's what the law says. Because you're lawfully stationary at a traffic control device. What about a situation where law enforcement is investigating a crash and the vehicles have come to a stop, let's say on the I-10? Is that lawfully stationary? What do y'all think? Yes, because if you look at the statute, it says pursuant to law enforcement orders. So in that situation, people can use their phone. So it's all about lawfully stationary. If the vehicle is pulled over on the side of the road, on the shoulder of the road, and it's parked, that's lawfully stationary if they're doing something. Let's say that they have to pull over because maybe they need to input something into their GPS. That would be lawfully stationary as long as they're not violating another law. Let's talk about what is a wireless telecommunication device. It's not just a phone. It can be an iPad. I never knew what a text messaging device. I didn't know that these things existed, but that's what this is right here. So basically it's a device that just allows you to text text people without actually having a cell phone, like being able to call somebody. So it would be an iPad. It could potentially be a Kindle if you're accessing the internet. So basically, it's any device that you can do any of these things with. It does not, however, include anything that's permanently affixed to the vehicle. So how many of you have a navigation system on your vehicle? So that is permanently affixed to your vehicle. That is not considered a wireless telecommunication device. So anything that's included in your vehicle that you can access is excluded by the definition. And then these are considered hands-free. Citizen band radio hybrids, two-way radio transmitters. So how many of you have been in a cab lately? Cab drivers get calls from dispatch, right? And they have telecommunication devices in those vehicles where they can communicate with their dispatcher. Those things that are included in those cabs are considered hands-free. Another thing that I thought was interesting, because it says electronic communication devices with a push-to-talk function. So that would be like a walkie-talkie. So that's what's included as a hands-free device. All right, and now we're gonna go into the actual, what does it mean that you're operating a device? So making and receiving phone calls. You cannot now hold your phone in your hand and make a phone call or receive a phone call in your vehicle. Manual entry of names and phone numbers. That's excluded. Writing, sending, or reading a text-based communication. So you can't send text, you can't look at your emails, you can't do anything else where you're holding your phone in your hand. Accessing, reading, or posting to social media networking sites. Somebody said, why didn't you include TikTok? I'm not a TikTok person, so I just didn't put a picture up there. But it could include TikTok, it could include LinkedIn, include any social networking site. This one. How many times have you seen people post on social media while they're driving, they're taking videos of themselves? All right, well, you can't do that. Accessing, viewing, posting, editing, or creating a video, photograph, or any other image. Not allowed. You can't be watching videos, you can't be taking videos, and you can't be taking pictures of yourself while you're driving or you're operating that vehicle. Now, what about if you're stopped at a red light? Remember, lawfully stationary? So if you're lawfully stationary, even though the vehicle is in gear and your foot's on the brake, technically, you're not violating the law. Accessing or reading or composing or anything that you do with an app. I put the McDonald's app up there because how many of you use those apps to go ahead, or like Chick-fil-A, to place an order and then go pick it up? Well, you can't, anything that you have on your phone, any app that you're gonna be accessing, if your vehicle is moving, you cannot use it. Using any application or feature of a wireless telecommunication device. So anything that you're inputting. So one of the questions that was asked by me is, what if you mount your phone in your vehicle and then you want to use your navigation system on your phone? So like your app, your Waze, let's say. And if you have to physically input the address on your Waze, or you have to look up let's say I was trying to get here, right? Rendezvous. If you are moving, then you cannot do that. Now, if you do it before you get moving and then you mount it on your vehicle and you need to look at it, that's okay. Now, I think the question would be your navigation in your vehicle, right? Can you access it? Well, the law doesn't say that because remember, it excludes from the definition of a wireless device anything that's in the vehicle, but we don't have to worry about that because your car won't let you do it. If you're moving, it will not let you access the navigation system while your vehicle is moving. So if you're trying to enter something into Google while you're moving, you can't do that. Holding or physically supporting a wireless telecommunication device in either or both hands. Can't do that. Now, there are some exceptions. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with 32295.2. That's the statute that says you cannot use headphones while you're operating a vehicle. There are exceptions, though. If you have an earpiece just on one side, or like a Bluetooth headpiece, those are excluded. So you can use those. You just can't use these over both ears. Now, these, right, if you only had it over one ear, 295.2 says it's okay to do it. You just can't have it over both ears. It's just for safety reasons. The other thing that the statute specifically excludes is your Apple Watch. It allows you to listen and to talk on your phone while you're operating your vehicle. It specifically talks about a device worn on the wrist to talk or listen during a voice transmission. All right, there's additional exceptions. So if you see a crash and you need to call 911 or you need to call and alert somebody that there's an emergency or a traffic collision or something like that, you can call 911, you can call whatever, on the causeway. I think it's called Star 27 or something like that. You can call those from your handheld devices, and there's an exception. There's actually an affirmative defense that you can prove that that's what you were doing when, you got cited for violating the law. If you believe that somebody's about to, incur serious bodily injury, I don't know what other situations you would call, but if you're calling to get help for somebody, it's okay. Remember I was talking about the cab? If you're relaying information between a transit for hire, so the cab driver is talking to their dispatch, then that's excluded. But it has to be on a device that is affixed to the vehicle. Let's talk about the secondary violation, because this is not a primary violation. So if the use of the wireless device occurs in any location other than a construction zone or a school zone, then it's a secondary violation, which means that the law enforcement officers cannot pull that person over to cite him just for that. Kind of like the seatbelt laws were. I don't know if you remember when we passed the seatbelt law, it was a secondary violation. So if you saw somebody not wearing their seatbelt, you couldn't pull them over for that. You had to pull them over for some other violation of the law. Maybe they ran a red light. Maybe they were speeding. Maybe their brake tags expired. Maybe they don't have a license plate on their vehicle. Maybe they're doing something else, but you couldn't pull them over just because you saw them texting or using their phone while operating their vehicle. So be aware, law enforcement officers, that it's a secondary violation. There's a $100 fine. The fine can be cut in half if they do community service, if they have to do 15 hours of community service. For law enforcement officers, if you believe that as a result of that, let's say you respond to a crash and you believe that the person was on their phone, make sure that you note that in the police report, because it does double the fine, but the officer has to note that in the report. It has to be in the report. And it's treated as a non-moving violation. An officer cannot search a vehicle, search a person, search a passenger, access the contents of the phone, or arrest an individual as a result of that secondary violation. But then you can't pull them over for the secondary violation, right? So if you pull them over, there's a reason you pull them over. So let's say they ran a red light. If you decide that there's a reason to search the vehicle or the passenger, you have to make sure you cite the primary reason for the stop, and then whatever probable cause or reasonable suspicion you would need. Now, as far as an arrest, if the person has an attachment, a warrant, then you can. Okay, the primary offense. It is a primary offense if the violation occurs in a construction zone or a school zone. The fine is $250. The judge can reduce that to $100 with 15 hours of community service. That community service includes litter abatement, and it has to be done in a construction zone or a school zone. And it is still a non-moving violation. Now, construction zone. The statute 3259 does not tell you what a construction zone, but if you look at 3257, it defines what a construction zone, and it says it's a highway with construction, maintenance, or utility work activities marked by temporary traffic control devices consisting of signs, channeling barriers, pavement markings, and/or work vehicles. So if you see any of this, that's a construction zone. That's easy enough. School zone, on the other hand, is a little bit harder. Title 32, Title 14, they don't define what a school zone is. So I know a lot of law enforcement officers have questions about this. So school zones are designated by specific traffic regulations. And the state, the Department of Transportation, decides what school zones to put for state highways. Local municipalities, local governments, they're the ones responsible for deciding the school zones within their jurisdiction. So I looked, like this is 3651, which is the Jefferson Parish Ordinance for me, defines what a school zone is. And it talks about beacons and the signage. Terrebonne Parish has a speeding in a school zone. And I went back to look, and Terrebonne Parish, the Public Works Department for the parish is the one that's responsible for designating and putting up signs for the school zones. So this is important for law enforcement officers. And I'm glad to see Christine Russell, the DA, for your parish here, because I think she probably thinks the same way I do. You have to have signs. You can't charge somebody with a violation of something if there's no signs. So if your parish doesn't have signs in school zones, then they need to put them up. That's it. They have to have signs saying this is the school zone, this is where the school zone ends. Because if you don't have them, as a prosecutor, I'm not prosecuting that case. Because you have to give people notice that they're entering a school zone. Just because the sign is down and we know it's a school zone, but the sign is down, I'm not prosecuting that case. So make sure that the school zone signs are up, and if you're missing school zone signs, that they get placed so that you can enforce the law. There was another question too about preemption. The statute itself, if you look at 3259, it specifically says that state law preempts. So you cannot have a local ordinance dealing with wireless telecommunication devices being operated by drivers. If you have one, you cannot use it. As of August 1st, this law preempts all local ordinances. And another thing that this law did, which is kind of disheartening, is that it repealed all the previous laws that we had in place dealing with operating vehicles and texting and underage drivers using handheld and hands-free devices. All of those have been repealed. So it repealed 32300.5, which prohibited drivers from using wireless telecommunications devices to send text messages and go on social media sites. It repealed 32300.6, which was specific for our young drivers. It basically held that Class E learners permit or intermediate license holders could only use hands-free devices. So they could only make calls if they were on a hands-free device. That's gone. It also got rid of 32-300.7, and that was the one that prohibited drivers under 17 from using devices to call, to text. It got rid of that. And it also got rid of 32-300.8, which was the hands-free in school zones. So if you were gonna use a phone in a school zone, it had to be hands-free, that's gone. So all those laws are no longer being able to be used. So I went through that really quick because I wanna make sure that we have a lot of time to talk about questions, because I know there were a lot of questions. And now it's the time to kind of dig into all those little nuances of what this law does and what it doesn't do. So please, and I'm gonna have to repeat the question because it's being filmed for other agencies that couldn't be here if they have questions. So I'm gonna, when you ask my question, I'm gonna repeat your question so that we can have it recorded. Okay, the question is, for the school zone violations, do you have to have just the school zone signs, or do you have to have the hands-free signs? And so let me answer this question by going back. Okay. Oh. So 32-300.8, that was the statute that was in place before that talked about hands-free in school zones. That statute specifically said that it defined application of the law in a school zone during posted hours when signs are located in a visible manner in each direction that indicate the use of a handheld wireless communication device is prohibited. So that statute required that. 3259 does not require that. So as long as the signs are designated as a school zone, so the area is designated as a school zone, you have a, school zone starts here and the school zone ends sign here, then the way I interpret it, you're good, because it didn't require that. Yes, ma'am.
So, but the schools still need to be in session. Like a school zone exists from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. So even though it's marked a school zone, school must be in for this to apply to be in a school zone.
So the question is, for the school zone violations, does school have to be in? So if it's a violation of the law in a school zone, does it have to be doing school work hours? And I would tell you that the intent of the law, it doesn't say. It doesn't say. But from reading the previous law, it specifically talked about during school hours.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah.
It's not specific.
No, it doesn't. I think that when they wrote this law, they just didn't think. They thought school zone, but the school zone's not, it's only in effect during certain hours. It's not a school zone. Just because you have signs, it doesn't mean that the school zone is in effect on Sundays or Saturday or at 9 p.m. So I would tell you that in interpreting that, I would say it's during school hours, during the school zone time, Any other questions? I know you all have questions. Oh, there we go.
What about in school zones when it says while flashing, and they're not flashing, but it's technically during school zone hours? I would think that would be an exception as well because they're not.
So she's asking about, what about when, but not, okay, let me ask the question. She's asking about school zone when there's a beacon flashing, which I think.
It specifically says the hours are while flashing.
Yeah, so if it says that so if there's, let me go back and then I'll ask the question. So her question is, there's a beacon that says school zone when flashing. What if the school zone beacon is not flashing? I would tell you that as a prosecutor, if the school zone is when the beacon is flashing and it's not flashing because it's malfunction, I'm not gonna prosecute that case. Because I think that you're gonna have a problem with notice. Yes. Yes.
Medical devices. I'm a type 1 diabetic and I have an insulin pump. Now, I used to have a device that would control it, but now it's done through my cell phone. So if you need, or just medical devices in general.
Okay, so he's asking about medical devices, like for example, when you have an insulin pump. He's asking, now he has an app on his phone that allows him to control that, right? Okay, so let's go back. It doesn't fall under any of these, right? It doesn't. But I would tell you that if you are having a medical emergency, if it rises to the level of a medical emergency, I think one of the exceptions would be applicable. But do you want to be operating anything while you're driving, even if it's a pull over, right? Pull over, and then you don't have to deal with the issue, because as long as the vehicle is stationary, then you're going to be okay, as long as you're not impeding traffic.
I think we'll get that question, from
Yeah.
from defendants saying, "Oh, well, look, I was using it as a medical device."
And then I think that, I'm going to tell you, and I don't know if Christine has, I hate to put Christine, but she's a DA and she's here, so I'm going to use her thoughts too. I'm going to tell you that if somebody has a medical emergency, and then, like, what does your app do?
So two apps. One controls
The insulin
glucose.
level?
One does the glucose level, and then one gives me insulin.
Okay, so one controls the glucose level and one gives you insulin. So it's physically an emergency. So at that point, if you gave me proof that that's what you were doing at that time, I wouldn't prosecute you. Christine? Right, exactly. So, it doesn't take away the DA discretion to look at situations. How many times has somebody come to me and said, I was speeding on the causeway because I was transporting my mother to the hospital. I didn't want to argue with the police officer. I took the citation, but here you can see this is the time that the ticket was issued. This is when we got to the emergency room. Do you think I'm going to prosecute that person? No. So we're still going to be able to use our discretion. And you still have to you still have to use your discretion if a situation like that arises.
So, speaking of discretion, the way the law is written, as I understand it, if the violation occurs in a work zone or a school zone, the judge can reduce that $250 fine, provided he gives them 15 hours of community service. However, that community service has to be in a school zone or a work zone,
Yes.
which is a horrible idea.
So the question is, for a violation that occurs in a construction zone and a school zone, the judge can reduce the fine by half, basically. But they get 15 hours of community service that they have to do, I told you that earlier, in a construction zone or a school zone. And Ron's saying that's a terrible idea. Yes, I don't know if you want a bunch of lay people doing, but that's what the law says,
And I think, and the reason I bring that up, I think prosecutors and police officers need to be aware of that ahead of time, so they can talk to the judges and other prosecutors and let them know that if they do that, that's going to be the result. And we certainly don't want pedestrians in a work zone picking up the trash.
Yeah, because it's litter abatement in a school zone or a construction zone. So I know there was a question over here. Yes.
I understand for secondary violation, you cannot write a ticket on January 1st.
Yes, I actually covered that, but I think I didn't talk about it. So yes, I'm going to repeat the question. I'm getting to it. So the question is, if you're doing a secondary violation, you cannot actually start writing tickets, like a citation for that, until January 1st. Anything that you do, so enforcement, warnings until January 1st, and then actually full enforcement with fines beginning on January 1st. Yes, hold on. Yes.
Do you have to witness the primary before the secondary? For instance, let's just say you're on the side of the vehicle and you see that they're holding their phone. And you get behind them and they put it down, and then you catch them with, they didn't use their blinker because it still fit.
Okay, so the question is, do you have to see the primary before you see them using their phone in their hands. So the example was, you see them using their phone, but then you get behind them and then you see that like their license plate is expired. No, the law doesn't say how it happens. You just have to have another reason to pull them over, right? So it has to be another violation of the law. There was a question over here.
Norma, I didn't have a question, but I wanted to go to my fellow diabetic over there. Remember, at a red light, you can give yourself insulin because you are now at a stationary point.
Well, that's why I said you can pull over on the side of the road and do it. Yes.
So I just wanted to clarify, you had said that it had basically taken place, it removed anything prior to it, including the 17 and under drivers, anything that applied to them. So that's the GDL, right? That they cannot use a hands-free, I mean, they can't use anything.
It repealed. So the question is, she just wants to clarify what it repealed. So it repealed all the laws that we had in effect that dealt with hands-free, that dealt with texting and driving. And so it's 32,300.5 through 3,200.8. Okay, so all those laws have been repealed.
So this new law applies to any driver regardless of age?
Correct.
Okay.
So the question is, this law applies to any driver regardless of age? Yes. So these are all the statutes that have been repealed. All of these. Any other questions?
With regards to the charging instruments and the language on the bills of particular, I guess, if they have other offenses where you actually state charge language, do you feel that we would have to include unless lawfully stationary, or would that just be something that would have to be proven? So the way I have the charge language written is, did operate any wireless telecommunication device while operating a motor vehicle upon any public road or highway. But the statute, normally I would not put the exclusions, but.
Okay, so the question is for so this is going to be for prosecutors. She's asking about the charging language for the bills of information. Do you have to put that they operated a vehicle and used a wireless device while operating a vehicle? Does she have to include that they were not lawfully stationary? I probably would. I would, just because that's what the law requires. That's what the law requires. So I always like to include,
get very
yes.
detailed and include everything, but I don't go through the line items usually of unless.
Yeah, and if you look, so the actual violation as far as in the statute, it says, it's B, it's subsection B1. Notwithstanding any provision of law to the contrary, except as provided in subsection C of this section, no person shall operate any wireless telecommunication device while operating a motor vehicle upon any public road or highway unless the motor vehicle is lawfully stationary. So I would include it. Now, I just read you the entire subsection that talks about the violation. What jumps out at you that I didn't yet address, but I was hoping that somebody would ask the question, but nobody has yet? What does it say that's similar to the implied consent law? So it says, on public roads, on a public road or highway. So what happens if somebody's texting in a parking lot? Is that a public road or a highway? Nope. I'm sorry, somebody said something? I can't hear you, I'm sorry. Yes, you cannot enforce Title 32 in private property. So that's going to be an issue, right? Now, that's Title 32. What if they're texting in a parking lot and they cause a crash. Right? Well, if they violate, let's say it's a reckless operation, $14.99. Then I think that you Title 32 in private property, just like you can do a DWI, you can have a DWI, driving while intoxicated case, in a private parking lot, because that's a criminal offense. Right, hit and run as well. So another question that I'm surprised nobody asked, because I know that it was sent to me, what happens if somebody is at a red light, they're lawfully stopped because they're at the red light, so they're observing the traffic control device, and they're looking at their phone, and then they get distracted because they went down a rabbit hole on Instagram, and now they're blocking traffic. Law enforcement officers, what do you do? What do you charge them with? Anything. Can you pull them over? Anybody? What are they doing? What are they doing by basically, they're what? They're blocking the road. So I brought two statutes that I wanted to make sure I talked about, which I love using, and sometimes even when officers, I do this for DWI offenders, when they're asleep behind the wheel of a vehicle at a red light, and the reason that police get called is because somebody's like, hey, there's somebody like slumped behind the wheel of a vehicle at this intersection, right? And so police don't necessarily charge them with impeding a public passage or blocking the road. There's actually two statutes that you can use. 32-100.1 is obstruction of public passage, and it basically says no person shall willfully obstruct the free, convenient, and normal use of any public highway, road, or other passageway. It's got more stuff in it. By impeding, hindering, or stifling, retarding, or restraining traffic or passage thereon. Or what about 1497, simple obstruction of a highway of commerce? The intentional or criminally negligent placing of anything, or the intentional or criminally negligent performance of any act on any road, highway, thoroughfare, which will render movement thereon more difficult. So, I mean, you could potentially do that, right? You could charge them with one of those, depending on how willful criminally negligent it is for you to be scrolling through Instagram while you're at a red light. So there are things that you can do. Even though it's a secondary offense, there are things that you can do. Any other questions? I know there's questions. Hold on 1 second. Yes.
So my question is from a public awareness standpoint, not so much with enforcement or prosecution. I understand the spirit of the law is the hands-free law, but we've covered a lot of stuff, and then looking at Section B, operation covers a lot of things that has nothing to do with using your hands. So one, I'm trying to make sure that I'm understanding that right. Like even looking at a video, making a video, even though you're not using your hands, all of that, from what I'm reading, would be outlawed by this. Okay. So in that sense, too, the difficulty we're going to have in trying to, like, because the mobile videos, the videos while driving, that's the thing that I would be most concerned about. That's the thing that's most common that I think people need to understand. And the hard part about that is they're going to say, well, it is hands-free. I'm not touching my phone. I'm recording. I'm not even looking at it. I'm looking at the road. I'm just recording a video of me talking. So that's the difficulty. And if we're saying that everything in Section B is outlawed, well, according to this, even writing, sending, or reading text-based communication. So even if you're using your Bluetooth, it would be outlawed because to even send a text message, because the one right before that talks about engaging in a call, but it gives the exception of using a hands-free wireless device. It doesn't give that exception when sending a text message. And I get that we're not worried about that from an enforcement standpoint or prosecution, but again, trying to educate the public on eliminating these. I'm just trying to make sure that we're getting this right because people people on social media like to argue with us, so.
Well, so the question is, it's a lot. I don't know if I'm going to be able to succinctly put everything, but he's worried about, you know, how do you inform the public, because it covers all these things, which, you know, just like if you're sending a text message via Bluetooth, but how are you doing that?
Voice commands, or touching your screen in your car, right? Which
Oh, like in your car.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. And I think this is where, you know, for letting people know, I think that even though technically the law says if you're inputting it in your screen just to activate, but if you're not actually typing, technically there's an exception because it's already built up in the car. But I don't know that we necessarily want people doing that, because that's the whole point of distracted driving, right? It's the same thing with answering a call on my phone and I'm driving like this so I can hear the person. I mean, I don't know. Well, my car tells me now I have a Lincoln Nautilus, and if I don't have both hands on the wheel, it will give me a warning and it will start slowing my car down. It literally will. I'm like, both hands are in, because there was some sort of glitch that I had to get fixed, but I had both hands on the wheel and it was literally stopping my car because it kept saying that I did not have both hands on the wheel. So if you don't have both hands on your wheel and you're inputting stuff in, that's the concern. We want people to be focusing on operating their vehicle and paying attention around them, not looking at videos, not responding to text messages, right? So that's what I would encourage all of us to tell them. Yes, there are exceptions, but those exceptions should be far and few between. Somebody who has to, you know, give themselves insulin, to me, that's a little bit different. I still don't think you should be dealing with medical conditions in the vehicle. Pull over and then deal with them. But if you can't, I get it. But I think we need to not go down the rabbit hole and all the intricacies and say, oh, it's okay if you are responding to a text via, because you're not paying attention. I can't even use my phone to call hands-free because my insurance company is tracking me, and it knows when I'm on the phone, even though it's hands-free, because USAA believes that hands-free talking on the phone is still distracted driving. So I think what we need to do is make sure that people are not driving, because even if they have their phone up and they're taking a video, it's still, they're panning to the camera. They're concerned about the camera and what they're recording, not what's in front of them. So so the question is there an exception for like Uber drivers, DoorDash drivers, when they're, I talked about the dispatch, because that's built into, remember it says it has to be built into the vehicle in order for it to be an exception. There's no exception for anybody doing their job if they're using their phone. The statute says hands-free, if going back to the term hands-free, as defined in this paragraph, shall not preclude the use of either hand to activate, deactivate, or initiate a function of the device, as long as it's built into the vehicle. So in that example, because when I plug my phone in, it does the same thing, but I'm still not inputting, I'm just hitting one button. If you're doing more than that, if you're just activating and deactivating, like when I get a phone call in my car, I have to hit the button on my steering wheel or on the screen to answer the call. It excludes that. But it's when you're inputting. But if, let's say that I have to, in order to navigate, I have to if I can just voice command and say, Waze, take me to Rendezvous Restaurant, and it does it for me, then I'm not using my hands. But if I have to input that address in, you are doing more than just activating it. Any other questions? And look, I mean, this is brand new. You know, the courts are probably going to have more thoughts and more issues, and who knows how much, you know, we're going to get as far as jurisprudence, because people are going to be challenging it. I don't know. But this is just my interpretation of reading the law as it is currently written, and based on the best legal interpretation that I can come up with. All right, I appreciate everybody being here. If you have any other questions, or if I can help you in any way, here's my contact information. There it is. Reach out. Thank you very much.